week 4 of the semester. An administrator looked a student in the eye and said flatly that she couldn't stay in a class she had legally enrolled in 6 weeks earlier. No written policy, no real explanation, just a woman with a stamp and a bad attitude who had decided the answer was no. What happens next is not a tantrum. There is no shouting, no complaint form filed in anger, no viral post. What happens is quieter than that, and considerably more effective. By the time it was over, the administrator had backed every single person into a corner using her own instructions, and the one door she assumed would always be open had been closed from the inside by someone she never thought to worry about. Stay with us. Priya Ose was 20 years old, a second-year mass communication student at a mid-sized university in Southeast Asia. She had been navigating the campus bureaucracy long enough to know how it worked, which offices handled what, which forms mattered, and which deadlines were real versus approximate. She was not a troublemaker. She was, by most measures, exactly the kind of student an institution should want: organized, employed, and paying attention. 2 weeks before the semester began, Priya and 2 of her closest friends, Tomas Reinhold and Adeze Mbeki, registered for their mandatory cross-faculty subject. Every student at the university, regardless of major, had to complete it. The syllabus was identical across all sections. The only variable was scheduling. The management faculty ran their section on Monday evenings, 6 to 8 p.m. The mass communication faculty ran their own section on Friday mornings, 8 to 10 a.m. Priya chose the Monday slot deliberately. She worked part-time, primarily on weekends, and getting from campus back to her neighborhood took roughly 2 hours. A Friday 8 a.m. class made that math brutal. The Monday class made it manageable. This was not a loophole. Students had always been permitted to select sections across faculties for this particular subject. Priya herself had done it twice before without incident. Tomas and Adeze had similar reasons for preferring the Monday slot. They registered, the system accepted their enrollment, and the semester began. For 3 weeks, everything was normal. Their lecturer, a calm and methodical woman named Mrs. Renata Volkov, ran a competent class. Nobody flagged anything. Then came week 4. The email arrived without warning. Mrs. Volkov wrote to all 3 of them, Priya, Tomas, and Adeze, to say she had just been informed that students from outside the management faculty were not supposed to be enrolled in her section. She wasn't hostile about it. She seemed, if anything, mildly puzzled. But the message was clear. They needed to switch. Confused, the 3 of them began making inquiries. They went first to the division that administered mandatory subjects. That office redirected them to the mass communication faculty admin. When they finally arrived at that office and explained the situation, they met the administrator who would become the center of this story. Her name, as far as anyone could tell from the nameplate on her desk, was Mrs. Florinda Chua. She did not greet them warmly. She did not ask clarifying questions in good faith. What she did, and this is worth describing carefully because it was not accidental, was talk at them in a way designed to exhaust rather than inform. She asked why they had chosen another faculty section. When Priya tried to answer, Mrs. Chua interrupted before she could finish the sentence. She asked it again. Priya started to answer again. Another interruption. Then came the phrase she repeated like a reflex. You can't. You can't. You just can't. No policy number cited. No written rule produced. No coherent reason offered. Just the word can't, delivered with the particular confidence of someone who has learned that repetition often works better than logic when the person across the desk is young. At one point, Mrs. Chua called them selfish for choosing a class time that fit their schedules, in a system that had permitted exactly this kind of cross-enrollment for years. Priya noticed what was happening. She had seen this technique before, not in a textbook, but in practice. Mrs. Chua was not trying to resolve anything. She was trying to wear them down until they stopped asking. And here is where Mrs. Chua made her first miscalculation. If she had been polite, or even just neutral, Priya would likely have relented. The inconvenience of switching was real, but survivable. What made Priya dig in was not the policy. It was the condescension. It was being called selfish for working a part-time job and planning around it. It was being interrupted mid-sentence by someone who then complained she wasn't getting answers. At a certain point, Priya stopped trying to explain and started listening differently, cataloging, specifically, what Mrs. Chua was actually saying versus what she was willing to put in writing. That distinction would matter later. Priya cut through the noise calmly. She said, "You have asked us several questions without allowing us to answer them, and you have not answered ours. We are willing to comply, but we would like to understand why we are being asked to change classes in week 4, and whether there is another option given that this schedule works significantly better for us." Something about the measured delivery landed. Mrs. Chua paused. Then, with visible irritation, she gave what appeared to be a real answer for the first time. "It creates problems in the end-of-semester report. Students should manage their schedules better." Priya replied evenly that she had understood university to be a place that accommodated students from different circumstances, including students who worked part-time to fund their education. Mrs. Chua shifted tone, not to genuine warmth, to the particular sweetness of someone changing tactics. She said, "Fine. Email your lecturer. If she agrees to let you stay, you can stay. If she says no, you come back here, drop the class, and register for your own faculty section." That was the offer. Those were the terms. Mrs. Chua stated them clearly in front of all 3 students. Priya smiled, said thank you, and left. Pause here for a moment. Mrs. Florinda Chua had just handed 3 students a specific set of instructions. Instructions she believed led to only one outcome. She had been doing this job long enough to know how it usually ended. Students got tired. Students gave up. Students did not, as a rule, read the fine print of their own compliance. She had no particular reason to believe this time would be different. She was about to be wrong in a way that was entirely of her own construction. Priya sent the email to Mrs. Volkov that same evening. She kept it professional, explained the situation clearly, and carbon-copied Mrs. Chua on the message, because Mrs. Chua had given her permission to pursue this path, and Priya wanted that on record. Mrs. Volkov's reply came within 24 hours. She had no objection to the 3 students remaining in her class. She said so plainly. The CC'd copy meant Mrs. Chua saw this response the moment it arrived. What happened next revealed something important about Mrs. Chua's actual intentions. Rather than honoring the terms she had verbally set out, "If the lecturer agrees, you can stay," she replied to the email chain with a lengthy explanation of why the students still could not remain enrolled. No new information, no new policy, just a reversal, dressed up in administrative language, from a position she had publicly committed to 48 hours earlier. This was the moment Priya shifted from defensive to deliberate. She had followed every single instruction Mrs. Chua had given her. She had gone to the right offices. She had asked the right questions. She had gotten the lecturer's approval in writing. And none of it had mattered, because the goal had never been compliance. It had been removal. That clarity changed her approach entirely. Priya reached out to the lecturer of the mass communication section, the class Mrs. Chua wanted them to transfer into. That lecturer's name was Ms. Yewande Ferreira, and Priya had known her for over a year. The relationship between Priya and Ms. Yewande Ferreira had developed naturally over the previous 2 semesters. Priya had helped with several of Ms. Ferreira's projects, organizing materials, assisting during sessions, staying after class when extra hands were needed. Ms. Ferreira had, in turn, been genuinely supportive of Priya's academic progress in ways that went beyond the transactional. They were not friends in the social sense, but there was real mutual respect there, the kind that gets built through consistent small actions over time. Priya messaged her privately, not through the official email system, through the messaging platform the university used for faculty-student communication. She explained that she might be joining Ms. Ferreira's Friday section as a result of a transfer she was being pressured into. Ms. Ferreira's first response was confusion. She had assumed Priya was staying in the management section. When Priya walked her through the full sequence of events, the week 4 email, the meeting with Mrs. Chua, the interruptions, the accusation of selfishness, the conditional offer, the agreement from Mrs. Volkov, and then Mrs. Chua's subsequent reversal, Ms. Ferreira went quiet for a moment. Then she said something that reframed everything. She told Priya that the report issue Mrs. Chua had cited was not real. The university's grading system pulled data automatically across all sections, regardless of which faculty the student belonged to. The end-of-semester report processed correctly, whether Priya was registered in the management section or the mass communication section. There was no technical error. There was no administrative irregularity. The reason Mrs. Chua had given, the one she had snapped out in irritation as if it were obvious, was false. Ms. Ferreira then explained what she suspected the actual issue was. Several students from her own Friday section had, sometime after the 3rd week of semester, requested transfers into Mrs. Volkov's Monday class, citing the early morning start time. Those transfer requests had been denied because they came in too late, past the deadline. The working theory, though Ms. Ferreira was careful to describe it as exactly that, was that pressure was being applied to create space in Mrs. Volkov's class by removing students who had enrolled legitimately in order to accommodate the late transfer requests from students who had not. Whether that was the full picture or not, the effect was the same. Priya, Tomas, and Adaeze were being asked to give up valid enrollments based on a stated reason that was factually incorrect. Ms. Ferreira did not need to be asked what she was going to do. She told Priya directly. As the lecturer of record for her section, any new student transferring in required her formal approval. Given what she now knew, both the circumstances and how those circumstances had been handled, she would not be approving the transfer. She would not be adding Priya, Tomas, or Adaeze to her class register. Without that approval, the transfer could not be processed. No signature. No transfer. Ms. Ferreira then went one step further. She contacted Mrs. Chua directly, through the official internal channel, to state that she was not accepting additional students into her section. She noted that the students in question had been enrolled in Mrs. Volkov's class since registration, that they were now in week 5 approaching a major assignment deadline, and that moving them at this stage would create a legitimate academic disruption with no valid administrative basis. She said this as a lecturer exercising her professional authority over her own course enrollment. She did not phrase it as an accusation. She did not need to. The effect was the same. Mrs. Chua had sent Priya to get 2 approvals. She had gotten both. The one Mrs. Chua was counting on to end it, the mass comm lecturer's willingness to accept the transfer, had instead become a wall, built quietly and deliberately by someone Mrs. Chua had never factored into her calculations. There was no dramatic confrontation after that, no office scene, no formal complaint filed, no disciplinary hearing. What there was silence from Mrs. Chua, and 3 students who remained exactly where they had been on the first day of the semester. Priya, Tomas, and Adaeze completed their first assignment for Mrs. Volkov's class without interruption. The semester continued. The end-of-semester report, when it was eventually processed, reflected their grades without any irregularity whatsoever. because there never had been one. What had actually happened, stripped of all the noise, was this. An administrator had used her position to pressure students into compliance through misinformation and deliberate exhaustion tactics. She had given verbal assurances she had no intention of honoring. She had cited a policy consequence that did not exist. And when the students she had dismissed as too young and too tired to push back had instead followed every instruction precisely and methodically, she found that she had constructed the very mechanism of her own failure. Every door she had pointed to had been opened. The last one simply didn't lead where she expected. There is a particular kind of confidence that comes from believing the people in front of you won't bother to read the fine print. It works often enough that it becomes a habit. What it cannot account for is the person who has been watching carefully, saying little, and building something solid in the background. Priya didn't win because she got lucky. She won because she paid attention, she stayed calm, and she knew, before Mrs. Chua did, exactly where the structure was going to give way. The ledger always balances eventually,